Before it was a number, it was a symbol. Before it was a ratio, it was a rhythm. And before it was printed in textbooks, it was carved in stone, woven in myth, and whispered by the living world. There are symbols that move through time unnoticed, not because they are hidden, but because they are everywhere. The spiral is one of them. We see it in the curve of a seashell, in the swirl of galaxies, in the unfolding of a fern, the nautilus, the hurricane. It lives in pine cones, sunflowers, hurricanes, and in the quiet chambers of the inner ear. It appears again and again, not by accident, but because the spiral is how life moves. Not in straight lines, not in rigid angles, but in curves, in turns, in returns. It is the shape of growth, not explosive, but recursive, layered, cyclical. It is not expansion for the sake of size, but for the sake of balance. And long before anyone called it Fibonacci, the ancients were already listening to it. They saw it not as a mathematical curiosity, but as a sacred code, a path, a map, a mirror of creation itself. In the temples of Egypt, the proportions of the golden ratio phi are woven into the stones. In the designs of Greek amphitheaters, the echo of spiral geometry allows sound to move cleanly. In Hindu yantras and Buddhist mandalas, you can feel the same gentle recursion, the inward and outward breath of the cosmos. And in the myths, you find stories of spiraling journeys not as metaphors, but as reflections of a reality that does not unfold in lines, but in arcs. The hero doesn't simply travel forward, he circles, falls, returns. Creation itself follows a spiral. Stars are born, expand, collapse, and begin again. So how did we forget? How did something so present become reduced to a line of digits on a page? Because modernity fears mystery. It prefers formula over feeling, predictability over paradox. The spiral was not forgotten because it was disproven it was forgotten, because it refused to be owned. It belongs to no religion, no culture, no empire. It is simply there, beneath all things, waiting. And when it does appear in science, as in Fibonacci sequence, we are told it is interesting, beautiful, even elegant. But rarely are we told that it is alive, that it is a behavior, not just a number, that it is conscious structure. And perhaps that is the secret the ancients knew, that the spiral was not just how nature grows, but how awareness unfolds. That the movement of thought, of memory, of time, is not linear, but spiral. We circle old patterns. We rise through familiar lessons. We return, but each time on a higher arc. This is the spiral we forgot. Not the one in textbooks, but the one inside you. The spiral of becoming, the spiral of soul. And maybe the Fibonacci sequence was never meant to be solved. Maybe it was meant to be felt. It wasn't his. He didn't invent it, and he never claimed to. But history gave his name to the sequence, and in doing so, it quietly buried the truth. We call it the Fibonacci sequence. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Each number, the sum of the two before it. Simple, elegant, infinite. It carries the name of Leonardo of Pisa, more commonly known as Fibonacci. But here's the quiet truth. He never discovered it. He only introduced it to a world that had forgotten. Fibonacci lived in the 13th century, a time when Europe was emerging from intellectual silence. He traveled. He learned from the Arab world, from merchants and mathematicians who had preserved the knowledge of earlier civilizations. And in 1202, he published Liber Abaci, a book on arithmetic. In it, he posed a problem. How many pairs of rabbits will be produced in a year if each month they produce another pair, and reproduction begins in the second month? It was a puzzle, and the answer was the sequence we now call his. But the pattern, the spiral, the growth curve of life? That was not his creation. It had been known in Egypt, in India, in Babylon, long before Fibonacci's pen touched parchment. In the Sulba Sutras of India, written more than 1,000 years earlier, we find traces of this mathematical rhythm. In ancient Egyptian art, the use of golden proportions is not speculation, it's visible, measured, embedded in sacred architecture. And in the spiral shapes found on Neolithic stones across Europe and Asia, we feel a reverence for that rhythm long before it was a number. So why, then, do we call it the Fibonacci Sequence? Because history remembers names, not whispers. It preserves authors, not echoes. Leonardo's book was rediscovered during the Renaissance, when Europe sought to reclaim its own light and rebranded ancient truth as modern discovery. It was never malice, but it was erasure. And what was lost was not just attribution, but meaning. Because when a symbol becomes a man's name, it becomes smaller, contained. It is no longer a living code. It is a curiosity, a function, a puzzle for students. But Fibonacci was not a mystic. He did not speak of spirals and sunflowers, or galaxies, or the sacred breath of creation. He was a bridge, but the river was always there. And so, the mistake was not Leonardo's. It was ours. We gave the sequence his name, and in doing so, we disconnected it from the ancient breath it carried. We forgot that the pattern is not new. It is primordial. It is not intellectual. It is elemental. And it was not made for rabbit problems in books. It was made to remind us that creation itself grows in rhythm, that life does not multiply in chaos, but in a deep, recursive intelligence. And that intelligence does not belong to any man. It belongs to the universe. It is the shape of emergence. And once we see it not as Fibonacci's tool, but as a living spiral of becoming, we begin to remember that truth does not need an author, only an open eye. Before there were equations, there were temples. Before there were numbers, there were spirals carved in stone. Before it was called Fibonacci, it was sacred. Long before modern science laid claim to logic, and long before scholars mapped the spiral with numbers, ancient minds were already listening. They didn't need computers. They didn't need calculus. They had something far more powerful, a deep resonance with the living world. In Egypt, builders of stone aligned temples with the stars, but they also built in patterns of proportion that mirrored the golden ratio centuries before anyone named it. Look at the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its proportions the height to half the base mirror fee. Coincidence? Perhaps, but too precise to dismiss. These were not accidents. They were ritual mathematics. In India, the Sulba Sutra sanctioned texts on altar construction encoded ratios that followed Fibonacci principles for the sake of energetic harmony, not aesthetics. The altar was not just a place. It was a bridge between worlds, and that bridge had to be built in rhythm. The same rhythm found in plants, in breath, in life. In Greece, the golden mean was revered as the essence of beauty and balance, not just by sculptors and architects, but by philosophers. Pythagoras, Plato, they spoke of harmony not as sound, but as structure itself. For them, number was not quantity, it was principle, alive, divine. and behind number was form, and behind form the spiral. The Parthenon, its facade reflects Phi, its columns a rhythm of balance and motion as if the building breathes. In the Mayan world, spiral glyphs appear in sacred calendars. The turning of time was never linear to them. It was recursive, cyclical. A spiral, again. In ancient Celtic sites, spirals carved into stone mounds, as if the earth herself were exhaling the pattern. They called it many things, but what they felt was the same law. A living pulse, a rhythm beneath things. And here's what makes this so powerful. These cultures never met. Their borders were oceans. Their gods were different. Their alphabets unshared. But the pattern is the same. Because it was not a cultural idea. It was a universal law. Something embedded not in belief, but in the fabric of being. And when you see it show up again and again on temple walls, in sacred art, in myths and mandalas, you realize they were not obsessed with numbers. They were in awe of alignment. They didn't need Fibonacci. They needed resonance. And they understood what we are only starting to remember. That the pattern of growth, of beauty, of harmony is not invented. It is recognized. And it's not ancient because it's old. It's ancient because it's eternal. It was never about numbers. It was always about rhythm. Because life doesn't think in digits, it moves in pulses, in waves, in breath. When we speak of Fibonacci, we are told of a sequence. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Add the last two, get the next. Repeat, repeat. But that's not how life moves. Life doesn't add. It doesn't calculate. It grows. And growth is not arithmetic. It's music. You see, the sequence is not a formula. It's a tempo. It's not a structure to memorize. It's a feeling to inhabit. Think of a seed. A spiral unfolds. One leaf, then another, then two, then three. Not because it's doing math, but because it's responding to something deeper. A rhythm encoded in space itself. It's as if the universe is humming a song, and everything alive is dancing to its timing. And this is where Fibonacci becomes more than mathematics. It becomes metaphysics. Because this rhythm, this unfolding pattern shows up in asterisk, your heartbeat, asterisk, your brainwaves, asterisk, the ratio between your bones, asterisk, the spacing of your teeth, asterisk, the spiral of your cochlea, how you hear sound, asterisk, the breath patterns of sleep. It's in your blood and your breath and the geometry of thought. Because thought doesn't move linearly. It spirals, it loops, it returns. Memory itself is not a straight line. It's spiral time. You remember, then forget. You return to the same idea, but from a higher place. That's not random. That's Fibonacci. It's not the number, it's the interval. It's how things stretch without snapping, how they grow without falling apart. It's how life organizes itself. Why do plants grow in spiral phyllotaxis? Why does the ear spiral inward to hear? Because the spiral is the most efficient, most resonant way to store and expand information. It conserves space, maximizes energy, minimizes waste. Fibonacci is not just growth, it's intelligent growth. Harmonic, stable, alive. And when you listen closely, you realize something. Music follows the same principles. Harmonic intervals, thirds, fifths, octaves, follow ratios aligned with golden patterns. That's why music feels right. It's not culture, it's physics meeting soul. So what does this mean? It means you don't have to understand Fibonacci with your mind. You already do with your body. Your heartbeat modulates in patterns of expansion and return. Your lungs breathe in spirals, literally. As airflow curves through branching bronchioles, it follows phi. You are built to resonate. And that resonance is not an equation. It's a dance. When the ancients carved spirals, they weren't solving puzzles, they were tuning themselves to the rhythm of being. And today, as we return to that pattern not with calculators, but with consciousness, we remember. It was never about digits, it was always a drumbeat, the pulse of light, the cadence of the cosmos. And you are not a spectator. You are the spiral, remembering its own song. It isn't out there, not just in flowers or galaxies or ancient architecture. The spiral lives inside you, and it's been building you since before you were born. Every cell in your body was shaped by rhythm. Every bone, every breath, every beat, a consequence of motion that follows a sacred pattern. You don't just witness the spiral, you are woven from it. Let's begin with your DNA. The double helix, a spiral ladder twisting through every cell. It encodes all that you are, but it's more than a structure. It's a process, a flow. The length between twists of that spiral, its pitch, relates closely to the golden ratio. Coincidence? Unlikely. It's not that DNA is Fibonacci, it's that DNA obeys the same music. Your spine? 33 vertebrae curving gently in an shaped spiral, designed not just for strength, but for motion. Not rigid, but responsive. Even your heart doesn't beat in straight lines. It contracts and expands in a torsional spiral twist. That's how it pumps so efficiently. It doesn't throb, it twirls. Your cochleath organ of hearing spirals inward like a nautilus. Why? Because sound is wave, and wave needs shape. The spiral lets you hear with clarity, with depth. It lets you decode the invisible. And your brain? The folds of the cerebral cortex aren't random. They spiral, they curve, creating more surface area, more room for thought, memory, awareness. Even in your eyes, the way light is focused through the lens, processed by a layered retina, there is flow, not line. And here's the mystery. Why would all of this intricate biology follow a pattern seen in sunflowers? Why would your body, this fragile miracle, mirror the same sequence that grows pine cones and hurricanes? Because you are not an accident. You are resonance. You are built to match the geometry of becoming. And the Fibonacci rhythm, that gentle unfolding of 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, it is not a ladder to climb. It is a path you've already walked. Your embryonic development followed it. The way cells divide, the way limbs extend, the spiral turn of muscle fibers all obey the logic of elegant expansion. You didn't learn Fibonacci, you grew by it. And it doesn't end at form. Your psyche follows it too. You circle back to the same emotional lessons, but at new depths, new angles, new light. You spiral through love, through loss, through fear, and return until they become wisdom. Even your dreams return in patterns, not repetitions, spirals. Each time you wake up, you carry a little more from the deeper layer. That's not random. That's the spiral. The Fibonacci sequence is not just biology, it is the architecture of consciousness. And when you begin to live with that awareness, when you stop thinking of yourself as a straight line or a stack of organs, but instead as a spiraling field of memory and light, you start to move differently. You trust the curve, you allow the return, you see the detour as part of the arc. And then you realize something. You are not a machine, you are a song in motion, composed not of code but of rhythm. And that rhythm, it didn't start with you. It started with everything. It speaks without words. It shapes without force. It moves across all species, all kingdoms, all time. And it says the same thing again and again in spirals. What if life has a language? Not one of alphabets, not one of mouths, but a geometry, a code written in form, in rhythm, in space. Fibonacci, this quiet sequence, is that language. It speaks in silence, and everything that lives already understands it. Look at a sunflower. Its seeds are not placed at random. They radiate outward in perfect spirals, clockwise and counterclockwise in Fibonacci numbers. Why? Because that arrangement allows each seed to receive the most sunlight, the most space, the most breath. It is efficiency, and it is beauty. The same can be seen in pine cones, in the petals of flowers, in the growth of leaves around a stem. Each new leaf appears not directly above the last, but offset by 137.5 degrees. That's not a guess. That's the golden angle. It ensures no leaf blocks another. It ensures balance, light, harmony. In animals, the horns of rams, the shells of snails, the spiral of a cat's tail when it sleeps Fibonacci. In hurricanes, in the swirl of ocean currents, in the spiral arms of galaxies. Over and over, across scale, across species, the same quiet whisper. Grow like this, spiral here, expand this way. Why? Because this language is not aesthetic, it's fundamental. It allows life to grow without chaos, to expand without losing center, to unfold with memory. You see, linear growth is brute force. Spiral growth is intelligent. It makes room, it dances, it listens. Even in your own gut, the way your intestines fold and fold again, it follows logarithmic spirals to pack the most function into the smallest space. But here's the deeper mystery. Life uses Fibonacci even when it doesn't need to. Even when other patterns might work, the spiral returns. As if the universe has a favorite melody, and every living thing can't help but sing it. You can think of it like a law, but it's more than that. It's a preference, a gentle bias of the cosmos toward beauty and function combined. And maybe that's the real secret. That life is not random, it is not chaotic. It is composed, not just to exist, but to express. And Fibonacci is how it remembers itself. It is the rhythm by which stars cluster and leaves unfurl. It is the measure by which form becomes sacred. It is the poetry of structure. And the more we study it, the more we map it in DNA, in shells, in galaxies, the more we realize life is not built with bricks. It is grown with songs. And Fibonacci is the verse that holds it all together. Even the spiral stumbles. Even the divine rhythm falters. And when it does, something else begins to speak. Distortion, disorder, and transformation. We speak of Fibonacci as if it were perfection, a holy code, a golden pattern that never errs. But in truth, the spiral sometimes shifts. It breaks, it bends, it veers into chaos. And that's not failure, it's part of its power. Because in nature, nothing is static. Everything that moves evolves. And sometimes, evolution means disruption. Look closely at a sunflower. Most follow the pattern, but not all. Some spiral unevenly, some cluster oddly, some fracture. The same happens in DNA. The double helix twists in perfect rhythm until it doesn't. Mutations occur, some devastating, some miraculous. Because life, in its essence, is not only about preservation, it's about adaptation. And the spiral is not a cage, it's a tendency, a preference, not a rule carved in stone. It teaches, but it doesn't enslave. Even galaxies, those mighty spirals of stars, sometimes twist into irregular chaos after collisions with others. Even stars forget their order when the pressure builds too far. And in the human body, what happens when the rhythm is lost? Arrhythmia, dis-ease, tension where there should be flow. Cancer, at its core, is a loss of harmonic growth, cells that multiply without regard for space, for structure, for purpose. It is Fibonacci ungrounded, growth without rhythm, expansion without awareness. And in the psyche, we spiral through memory until the loop becomes a trap. Trauma freezes the spiral, turns recursion into repetition. The same thoughts, the same fears on endless replay. No ascent, no higher arc, just a loop. This is the broken spiral. But even here, there is meaning, because breaks are not ends, they are thresholds. Every myth speaks of the fall, but the fall is not death. It is transformation. When the spiral breaks, it invites something new, a new rhythm, a new pattern. Some of the most beautiful patterns in nature emerge not from perfect order, but from friction. The rough edge, the asymmetry, the unexpected turn. They remind us the Fibonacci sequence is not about control, it is about listening. And sometimes life speaks in dissonance. It says, this no longer fits, shift, spiral differently. And so we learn that even disharmony can be sacred, that the spiral is not always golden. Sometimes it is cracked, crooked, scarred, but still, it moves. It seeks balance again, not in returning to perfection, but in creating something new. And maybe that's where beauty truly lives. Not in the flawless spiral, but in the one that broke and kept growing anyway. It was never just a pattern, it was a way in, not to more knowledge, but to deeper memory, not to complexity, but to truth too simple for words. What if Fibonacci is not a formula to observe, but a portal to enter? A key not to the outer world, but to the inner? For centuries, mystics, sages, and seekers have spoken of a path that winds inward, a spiral. Not straight, not fast, not logical, but recursive, rhythmic, holy. They spoke of ascent, but not like climbing a ladder, rather like spiraling up a mountain, returning again and again to the same point, but from a higher view. The labyrinth, not a maze to trap, a spiral to awaken. Walk it slowly, step by step, you return, but you are never in the same place. This is Fibonacci as ritual. This is not about numbers. This is about states of being. The spiral has always been there in temples, in altars, in sacred scrolls, in the nautilus shells placed in tombs, in the spiraled incense smoke rising through still air. In the coiled serpent, a symbol of energy, of memory, of rebirth. In the East, they speak of Kundalini, a coiled force at the base of the spine. It does not rise in a line, it rises in a spiral. It climbs, turns, activates. And as it does, your perception changes. Not added knowledge, revealed memory. The spiral leads not to facts, but to vision. To see again what the soul has always known. Artists have felt it. Leonardo, Michelangelo, Dali, they embedded spirals into their compositions, not to decorate, to initiate. The Fibonacci sequence as a psychic gesture, as if to say, look deeper, this is not design, this is instruction. Even sacred chants, Gregorian, Tibetan, Vedic, when visualized as waveforms, unfold in spiraling frequencies. Why? Because the spiral is the only form that holds both direction and return. It is the path that remembers itself. You walk forward, but feel backward. You ascend, but integrate the past. It is how healing works, not linear, spiral. You revisit the wound, but each time you carry more light. You meet the shadow, but from a new frequency. The spiral shows you your story isn't a line, it's a spiral staircase in a temple you forgot you built. And at the center of that temple, there is no answer, only stillness, only presence. You do not reach it by speeding up. You reach it by slowing down, by listening to the breath, by stepping with care. The Fibonacci sequence is not to be solved. It is to be followed. Not outward, inward. Not with the mind, with the being. Because the spiral doesn't lead to something else. It leads to you. You looked at the spiral and thought it was outside of you. But the longer you looked, the more you felt something stirring. Not curiosity, but memory. The Fibonacci sequence is not something you find. It's something you reawaken. Because every time you breathe, you follow it. Every time your heart beats in rhythm, every time your thoughts circle old lessons from a slightly higher place, you're walking it again. The spiral is not abstract, it's you. You are the golden ratio trying to remember what it already knows. Because here's the secret. Fibonacci is not a man, not a number, not even a sequence. Fibonacci is a mirror the universe holds up so that life can see itself and say, yes, that is me, that is how I unfold. And when you finally recognize it, not as theory, but as essence, you remember things you never read in books. You remember that time does not move forward. It spirals. You remember that healing is not a finish line. It is a turning, a returning, a rising. You remember that growth is not about leaving the past behind, but spiraling through it with greater and greater grace. You remember that love too follows the curve. It comes back around, not to repeat, but to complete. And perhaps most deeply of all, you remember this, that you were never lost, you were orbiting, and the center was never missing, only obscured by speed, by noise, by forgetting. So slow down, stand still, let the spiral settle. You'll feel it in your spine, in your breath, in your bones. A rhythm, a knowing. And then you'll see, you are not Fibonacci's student, you are its voice. Not a mind solving the pattern, but the pattern awakening as mind. And when you live that way, when you walk as a spiral in a world of straight lines, you begin to ripple outward. Your choices echo, your presence harmonizes, your life resonates. You become the breath of the pattern, not separate, not seeking, but the sequence remembering itself. And with every step, every spiral turn, you return home, not to a place, but to a frequency that has always been yours. You are the spiral. You are the breath. You are the golden path unfolding, again and again, in sacred rhythm.